Hello everyone and welcome to another middle game episode focusing on pawn structure and weak squares with Coach B and masteryourchess.com. This is the fourth and last video on weak squares, and here I'm just going to go over two master games that were played that also talks about weak squares that are a little bit different than the ones we've seen. And this first position comes from a game played by George Kishk versus Gregory Kaidanov. In this position, it's black to move. And if we analyze this position, we can see that this position is fairly equal. Both players have two rooks and a bishop. Now, if we look at the pawn structure, we can notice that white has a double pawn on the f file, while black has double pawns on the d file. However, in this position, black is a little bit better. If you try to look to see what weak squares are in white's camp, hopefully we could see the square f4 where the bishop is standing on, that is a weak square. Especially that the doubled f pawns are weak. As you're going to be surprised in this game, you're going to see that black here is going to try to activate his king. There are no open files for the rooks to take advantage of, and the weak f4 square would be an excellent square for black's king. So here, black moves king to e7, white replied rook a4, rook h to b8, bishop to c4, king to f6, king to f1, rook to a7, rook to e1, bishop to h6, king to e2, king to e5, king to f1, king to f4. And now if we look at this position, black is totally winning. His king is far more active than white's king. The game here continued with king to e2, rook to e7, and now a mistake by white, king to f1. Coming back, I do want to mention that here white cannot take the pawn on a6, as after d5 that bishop is trapped. After something like king to f1, rook to a7, e takes d5, c takes d5, that bishop has nowhere to go and the bishop will be lost, and black will have an easy win from here. However, coming back, the best reply here for white would have been maybe something like rook to g1. After d5, bishop to b3 and rook to b5, white is still able to hold on. But coming back, in this game, white played king to f1, from which the game continued with king takes on f3, bishop takes a6, d5, e takes d5, rook takes e1, check, king takes e1, rook e8 check, king f1, rook e2, rook a1, rook takes f2 check, king g1, rook g2 check, king to h1, and after bishop to e3, white resigned. He needed to play rook to e1, and after king to g3, rook coming to h2 would be checkmate, so here white would have to sacrifice his rook for the bishop, and after black will take back, there is no hope for white. And as you saw in this game, the king as well can be a fighting piece, taking advantage of a weak square. This next game was played in 1982 by Jeremy Silman versus Vincent McCambridge. And in this game, I'm going to fast forward through the moves and stop to comment at the critical position. And this is the position that was reached after 17 moves, and in this position, white is clearly better. He definitely enjoys two bishop and more central space. On top of that, black's pieces aren't well placed, and his king isn't safe on the queen side. Here, white continued with b4, which is a really nice move. This move not only strives to open up black's king, but it also aims to take possession of a number of enemy holes. If the c5 pawn captures or moves forward, white's knight will suddenly have an access to the hole on d4. From there, the knight would eye the deeper holes on c6 and e6. The game continued with h4. Here, white responded with queen to f3, c takes b4, knight to b1. The idea is that the knight will head to d2, then to b3, while it will gain access to both a5 and d4. The game continued with knight to e5, queen to e2, knight to e8, bishop to b6, rook to d7, knight to d2, f5, f4, knight to f7, knight to b3, bishop to g7, and now another pawn sacrifice, pawn to e5. This sacrifice gives white's knight access to the c5 square while also ripping open the g2 bishop's path along the h1 to a8 diagonal. And from here, I'm just going to fast forward through the moves so you can see how white ended up winning this game. And after this move, black resigned. If you liked my video, please subscribe and don't forget to check out my new website, masteryourchess.com, where you can learn, practice, test, and master your chess knowledge.